All right. Hello, Jeremiah. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so wonderful to have a CEO on Bitz about Bots. How are you doing?
Hi, Paula. Doing great. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, as we know, this world of hyperautomation has sort of expanded. There's several different tools, several different providers, several different vendors that have emerged on the scene. And you and I both share kind of this affinity for the process side of things, uncovering, unearthing, looking for different places where processes can be enhanced and therefore automated. And
Mhm.
so today I've invited you to sort of talk about some of the advent of technology, especially relating to the process mining, task mining space, some of these nuances that have come on the scene. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for starters, help our audience understand where you come from, a little bit about what your background is, and we'll go ahead and dive right in.
Sure. I'm Jeremiah Jeschke, founder, CEO, CTO of OfficeAutomata. This startup has been a journey for almost 8 years for us, and we kind of started in the process automation space. Went through Excel, AI for Excel, voice control for Excel, expanded to a full RPA platform. But when we were overseas in some of these conferences, we learned that, well, everybody had already chosen an RPA platform, but they were very interested in our discovery side. So we just cut off the RPA side and it just focused on that vertical, and it's grown quite a bit since then, especially throughout the market in terms of companies understanding why process intelligence is needed, and just the breadth of um, what's required to do process intelligence correctly.
Absolutely. And so if you were going to just kind of just kick this off, we have a wide array of folks that kind of tune in and listen to these video conversations to sort of learn a little bit more. If you had to kind of describe or define the components behind process mining, especially when it comes to AI. I think that's a nebulous term that some business
Mhm.
users kind of sling around. So, in your professional opinion and the way that you would dictate this or explain it to somebody, could you give us sort of your definition of what process mining is, how AI relates to that, and just to kind of share and level set for the rest of the crew?
Sure. There's actually three different terms here. There's process mining, which is pulling log data from CRMs, SEMs, software like SAP. It's just pulling like form submitted, form created, sent for approval. It's pulling that kind of data and running a pretty much off-the-shelf algorithm on it. Uh, Algorithms that have been built for almost 20 years now, and figuring out how different process steps link to each other. Task discovery is where you're pulling individual actions from either a screenshot or from uh, event data that people are doing on their systems and building out task maps. Process discovery is a different term where you're actually building up those other two layers and figuring out the end-to-end processes from all that data. If that makes sense.
Of course, it makes sense. It makes sense to me, but some people get a little bit confused in our alphabet soup, right? We tend to bring up RPA with the assumption that everybody knows what that stands for. So for those who don't know, RPA is robotic process automation, and the
Mhm.
special sauce behind what you've done and sort of what you've cultivated is the AI component of process discovery. So artificial intelligence as it relates to process, could you elaborate on that just a little bit to level set?
Sure. So, like for process mining, usually there's not AI involved. It's just an off-the-shelf algorithm. For visual process discovery, something that UiPath or Fortress IQ is doing, they're using AI to figure out what's in a screenshot of a task or a step of what a person's doing. We're using AI in a different way, as in fully unsupervised, as in the AI learns by itself. We just give it the data of what people are doing, and it figures out the tasks and processes, both how tasks are grouped together and what those maps are, how those linkages are, just all by itself. So, in terms of intelligence, AI would be defined as anything you're giving to some sort of model that where it's either learning by itself or you're teaching it how to understand the world.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so piggybacking off of that, what we at WonderBotz do is hyper automation all day, every day, find places where we can
Mhm.
automate processes. A lot of our clients get to this sort of crescendo where they've automated all the processes that seem obvious to the naked eye, obvious to the leaders who have tried to either re-engineer or optimize processes along the way. And there gets to be a place where you say, where do we scale? Where do we go from here? Tell us a little bit about your view on how some of the tools that you've developed can assist in understanding or uncovering new places to potentially automate.
Sure. So we prefer to start at the beginning, where a deep understanding of your processes and your tasks is required before you start the automation journey. Even if you've already done a few bots, what we've seen with our clients is if they want to scale up, sometimes they need to go back and revisit the processes that are, or bots that are failing a lot, and looking at why are these bots failing? Did we not build these bots correctly? Were there variations and exceptions that people were doing, and we misunderstood, or the developers misunderstood what they had to develop in terms of building a production-ready bot? So starting at the beginning is figuring out what your processes are, mapping them out, learning about the entire company architecture and the context around them. And once you're able to measure your processes, then you're actually able to start improving them. And improving them is what goes into a production-ready bot. A lot of the processes we see with our clients, they are very unstandardized. They're maybe even before that, they are using outdated apps that wouldn't be ready for a bot to use. So there's actually a digital transformation piece even before that. So uncovering all these pieces, from digital transformation to improvement to standardization to building to having process that's optimized and ready for automation, is what we call the automation journey. So even if you're at the end and you're looking for more places to build bots, you still have a journey to go through of looking for other improvement or processes ready throughout your company that you can start automation.
Absolutely. And what we always say is that if you don't have an active pipeline, of what your next automation candidate is, that's where you risk, the chance of kind of incurring technical debt or not being prepared to explain the ROI when it's time to renew that bot license, right? Or to expand it, or to ask for more. So it's always important to have that, that readily available. So Jeremiah, let's take it back one step. It's always interesting to me to find out how folks wind up in this automation space. Recently, I interviewed a client that went from internal audit to running a center of excellence. You wouldn't typically think of that as sort of a career trajectory. So tell us a little bit about how you got into this world. What started it, and why are you here?
Sure. I was a program manager for the Air Force. I worked on the stealth bomber. I worked with special operations, doing research and development for them. I worked on satellites and satellite control. Commissioned officer for 6 years, another consultant for another 3 years. And I always figured if AI was watching me and learning what I was doing, it probably could do half my job. So I left the Air Force and started just trying to automate my old job. And Excel was one of the applications I used a lot, so we started there.
Fantastic, fantastic. So when we were talking about the preparation for this interview, you and I sort of went back and forth on a couple schools of thought with how to automate versus how to think through the strategy. And I think we both agree that there definitely has to be a roadmap, right? There definitely has to be a strategy in place. There definitely has to be a pipeline of automation candidates, and or the ability to have a tool that's going to extract or reveal some of those next places that we should automate. But one of the things that we sort of talked about, and I thought it was a fascinating take, and I'd love for you to expand on it, is should you automate first and then solve for the outliers? In other words, group together all the places where a process could ultimately, be automated to uncover kind of a bunch of them, leave the outliers to be what we solve for. Or do you believe that there should be a place or an exercise of process improvement or even re-engineering prior to something being automated? So we kind of had perspectives on both of those, and I'd love for you to share those if you could.
It can be both, and we've encountered both with our partners. Some prefer to look for all the improvement opportunities first, and others want to do re-engineering for the existing opportunities. It's really up to where the company is at in their improvement or automation journey. In general, what we like to see is a close working relationship between the improvement department and the automation COE. To build that pipeline out, you will have improvement candidates that process mining or process discovery will identify, and building out that constant pipeline of we found something to improve, let's standardize it, and then we can pass that off to the automation COE. And then with the active candidates, they can go ahead and automate what they can. Sometimes you won't have a full process available to automate. It might just be a few tasks that are bot ready, and they need to improve other levels of those tasks to standardize them, or they might just be too complex and they need human intervention. It's really up to the end client what they feel like is best.
Well, and really what the value is, right? So it really comes down to, are we going to be automating building blocks? In other words, Legos perhaps of these tasks as you describe, places that we see that could maybe build upon each other for a later end-to-end process automation. Or is there something that that could be materially valuable and very quick to develop and deploy? How do you see your clients typically kind of deciding the order in which they automate? Because I think that tends to have a material significance on the program as a whole, what you're developing and delivering to the organization versus what you're pipelining for the future. How do you see clients kind of making that decision?
It depends if they have the building blocks already ready. So clients further along in their automation journey will have some building blocks ready, or they'll use WonderBotz building blocks, and they can put those in where they're have the biggest impact. Others are just so early in their digital transformation stage that they just need to go all the way back to the beginning and rethink their processes, where they need to change out some other software to make it automation ready.
And have you seen, because I know this is something that comes up a lot, and I was kind of peeking into the to this user group that sort of asks questions before we had this discussion, because I was like kind of addressing things that folks are asking. But there's a lot of discussion about whether we scrap the bots, whether sometimes it makes sense to scrap some of the early development work and some of the early automations that were done because there was a better way or there was a design that made more sense. Or through the advent of using tools like what you've described today, there seem to be, paths of less resistance, than what had previously been built to have to maintain. Do you see that conversation coming up where folks are leveraging your tools or services to kind of rethink and sometimes, redo some of the automation work that they've done? Is that becoming more prevalent in your view?
Yes, we do some bot tracking as well, and we see that conversation coming up where they might want to transfer the bots to different platforms and re-engineer them at the same time. Also, no code is becoming bigger in the marketplace, where a lot of these RPA platforms don't have APIs readily available within them, but some of these no-code platforms do. No-code APIs sometimes can be a bit more robust. Those APIs do change as well, but it can make automations faster and more long-term production ready. So we do see these conversations happening with the clients, with RPA versus no-code versus re-engineering. Yes.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing too is sort of folks either thinking through multiple RPA platforms. It used to be that you stuck to one and you were completely beholden to that RPA platform. We now see folks kind of connecting the dots with adjacent technologies in a different way as well, getting really creative about the application of a no code, low code type platform with their existing RPA. So we're seeing a lot of convergences of tools and technologies. What would be your advice for the rookie right? The person that started off that hadn't come across production roadmaps or product roadmaps, right? That maybe weren't ready yet, haven't had to kind of see the ebb and flow of best practices, kind of changing the way that we describe the best practices after we've gotten smarter, right? As vendors and hyper automation providers, and in the community itself, the doers of sort of building these bots and adding the smarts, on the front end or the back end, with different technologies. A rookie coming in, stepping on the scene today, I think is at an advantage, having learned from our lessons. What would you say is a place to start if somebody's just now dipping their toes into this digital transformation revolution, all these adjacent technologies, this alphabet soup of different tools that we've started to promote and explain in the marketplace? Where would you say to start if you were going to advise somebody, one of your clients, for example?
Work with a good partner. There's so many lessons learned and best practices out there that, like your company, WonderBotz, has learned that are critical for developing a good RPA or automation practice within the company. Even veterans of 20 years are still learning things of how to do things better. And as new technologies come online, you need that almost mentorship experience that's really required to getting a good ROI for your company.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And I've often thought that sometimes, vendors do a disservice to our end clients, to our clients, the ones that are actually applying this technology, by oversimplifying how these tools, work together. And so what would you say, to that? What have you seen over the last few years that has sort of emerged as one of those things that you can't overlook? And in my estimation, it's really been, the coupling of process understanding, truly understanding what the business outcome is that we're trying to achieve with technology, and marrying that back to the person that's developing the code, ensuring that they truly understand what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Have you seen better collaboration between the business users and the sort of the technical savvy folks in this space over the last few years?
I think it's actually gotten more separated. With more technologies coming online, you really need professional developers that are developing these robust bots or automations or no code. I think it's been a misunderstanding in the market that an average person can develop a bot, just run a recorder, stick it in production. Seen so many RPA failures that way, where they're taking stuff away from IT, which they really do need control for security and data information reasons over these production bots. But just sticking a recorder and putting a bot in production, it becomes a security nightmare. And even if it runs well, which most of the time, if you have a new developer that's just another business user working in ops, and they think, oh, I can be a citizen developer, I can build this. Software engineering is really painful sometimes, and it lands you in a lot of trouble. So a tight coordination between an understanding what your processes are, how to improve them with the business process improvement department, how to build them with the automation COD department, and how to run them with the IT department. It's a critical pipeline. And if, there's so many pitfalls along the way that's where I see a lot of problems happening.
No, absolutely. And I would agree with you that the more, that it is separating a little bit more. Everybody's becoming autonomous again and siloed. And at the very core of what automation is intended to do is to connect, right? It's intended to connect dots. And ironically, the people associated with the different fragments of the process actually getting automated and working using these tools are beginning to kind of converge, go away from each other and not converge quite like we had thought. So we're seeing that a lot too.
Yeah, to that point, what we've seen a lot in the past is BAs doing user interviews, sitting down with the user, taking notes, writing down step by step, turning into a PDD, maybe with the audit department or the client's compliance department, having that be what they think the process is, and then just passing that over to the developer. There was not a lot of crosstalk of what was the context of that. Are these actually the steps? if you get to give it to the developer, is this going to break in production? Or there's not a lot of communication there, and that's where I think a lot of RPA pilots and what is Ernst Young that says over 50% of RPA pilots fail, and what 83% of bots fail in production. That was from Pega. It's practices like that lead to RPA failure within within the industry.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. A lot of what we do, especially in the finance and accounting space, for example, you mentioned security and the importance of understanding that these digital workers, in essence, right, these bots, they're logging in, they should have the same security protocols as, the rest of the employees. And so why wouldn't you onboard a digital workforce the same way that you would a human workforce, and I think that's the conversation that we have to start having is that there's more of a personification or a tangible understanding that these are actually workers, and not just a tool stack, that we're putting together. Because you're absolutely right. It's the same type of continuity required to kind of get the job done. So as we kind of wrap up here, I wanted to just kind of ask one last thing of you, if you could give your 360-degree view, but also understanding it from the trenches. For folks that are at a point where they're really trying to identify what their roadmap should look like, right? We've all said, automation is here to stay. This isn't going anywhere. We're only getting better and more savvy at how we kind of connect all the dots. What would you say, to kind of be mindful of, and or what kind of things to adopt, perhaps as a mindset within an organization, to be continuously monitoring and looking for places to automate and to improve processes? I think that's always been kind of a staple within organizations, is how do we get better? How do we scale? How do we prepare for growth? How do we onboard new clients? How do we onboard new vendors? But with that automation lens, what would you advise, and how would you give, direction for what to continuously think of, so that you're constantly scaling and you're always making sure to have a program that's delivering value, as opposed to just being viewed as another cost?
Well, I will say that process intelligence should be at the forefront of your mind. It was Peter Drucker that says, if you can't manage, or you can't manage what you can't measure, and if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And a corollary to that is Bill Gates saying the first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. Second is that automation applied to an inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiencies. So we see this time and time again where bots being put in production that are magnifying the inefficiencies. And to go back a step, to be able to reduce those inefficiencies, you need to be able to improve those processes beforehand. And to be able to improve it, you need to be able to measure it. So the process intelligence is right there at the core of RPA, of learning what your company's processes are, so you can build that pipeline toward automation. Otherwise, you're risking, more than a bad ROI, a failed pilot, or just a failure to get anywhere in the automation world.
I couldn't agree more. I think that was beautifully said. And, the last thing we want is for any of our clients to approach that renewal spot and have to say, ooh, I'm not quite sure what value we delivered, and have to revisit, an entire strategy. You should be well on your way by the time you're renewing a bot. So hopefully that's the takeaway.
Building more.
Or building more. Yeah, you should be self-sustaining at a certain point. It shouldn't be break even. You should be paying for your own program. And so maybe that's a follow-up conversation we can have about getting that ROI at scale. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Jeremiah. I really appreciate that you were able to contribute your insights. Your career trajectory is so fascinating. I think everybody will get a lot out of what you've shared with us today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Paula. Appreciate it.
All right.